All right, chapter 8. Mark chapter 8, beginning in verse number 1. Mark chapter 8. A couple of weeks ago, we talked about a marvelous faith. And then last time, we talked about a mute that gains his freedom. And now tonight we're looking at another multitude fed. Another multitude fed. Mark chapter 8, beginning in verse number 1. In those days, the multitude being very great and having nothing to eat, Jesus called his disciples unto him and saith unto them, I have compassion on the multitude, because they've now been with me 3 days and have nothing to eat. If I send them away fasting to their own houses, they will faint by the way, for divers of them came from far. And his disciples answered him, From whence can a man satisfy these men with bread here in the wilderness? And he asked them, How many loaves have ye? They said, 7. And he commanded the people to sit down on the ground, and he took the 7 loaves and gave thanks and brake. And he gave his disciples to set before them, and they did set them before the people. And they had a few small fishes, and he blessed and commanded to set them also before them. So they did eat and were filled. And they took up of the broken meat that was left 7 baskets. And they that had eaten were about 4,000, and he sent them away. Father, would you help us tonight as we look to this important scripture? All of it's important, Lord, but I believe that the message that you have for us tonight is important for this occasion. And Lord, I'm asking you to help me to preach it soundly, Lord, in a way that rightly divides your word of truth, and just use this message, Lord, and speak to our hearts and help us. Help me. I need its help, Lord. And above all, may Jesus be lifted up and made much of. For it's in his name we ask these things. Amen. Now, just a couple of months earlier in chapter 6, you see Jesus feeding the 5,000. Now, it's important to understand in both of these cases, there's more than just 5,000 and 4,000 respectively. That is a number that does not include women and children. So a conservative estimate for the first miracle would have been 20,000 people. A conservative estimate for this one, let's see, probably probably 16,000 in that ballpark, okay? And I think that there's some wonderful truths here that we need to consider as we look at the feeding of the 4,000, another multitude that's been fed. All right, so here's the first truth. You ready? His power is equal. Now, what do I mean by that term? His power is equal. We have a tendency, at least I do, maybe you don't, but I do, when we look at these two similar miracles, for whatever reason, we tend to see this one as kind of a lesser miracle, don't we? Over here, he fed the 5,000. Over here, he just fed 4,000. Like that's some small thing. In fact, he fed more people with fewer resources here than he did here. Over here you have 5,000 men that he fed with 5 loaves and 2 fishes. Over here he had 4,000 men that he fed with 7 loaves and a few fishes. Once again, like that's some small thing. It is not. But we have a tendency to see an inequality, an imbalance, a lack of equilibrium here. But can I tell you something? There's an important lesson here. It is no more or less a miracle for God to do either of these things. His power is ever equal. He's never more powerful here and less powerful here. He's never more miraculous here or less miraculous over here. His power, his ability, his capacity is always limitless. It's always perfect. It's always equal, whether he's feeding 5,000 or 4,000, whether he's feeding 20,000 or 16,000, whether he has 5 loaves or 7 loaves. His power is always equal. Do you remember when Jonathan and his armor bearer were about to take on a Philistine garrison? And here was Jonathan's outlook in 1 Samuel 14, verse 6. Jonathan said to the young man that bare his armor, Come, and let us go over into the garrison of these uncircumcised. It may be that the Lord will work for us. Watch this. For there is no restraint to the Lord to save by many or by few. What's he saying? It doesn't matter how many people are up there. It's no more or less difficult for God. Now, here's one of the reasons I want these young people in here. If the Lord Jesus doesn't come back first, you are going to face, and you already have, but you will continue to face all kinds of problems and situations that are going to seem insurmountable. And some of them are going to seem tougher than others. To God, it matters not one bit. It matters not one bit. It is all equally in his capacity. Don't fall victim. None of us. Let's don't fall victim to thinking that this answer to prayer is of a lesser grade than this answer to prayer. Can I tell you, it's the same God, the same power, and the same result, that Christ be glorified. It's all the same. We're praying fervently for Jason Evans to be completely healed of his cancer. And when God does that, whatever way he does that, when he does that, that's going to be a great miracle. But it's no more a miracle than somebody we've been praying for to get saved. It's no more a miracle than somebody that was out of a job finds work. It's the same God, the same power, and the same result, that Jesus is glorified. It's all the same. But sometimes we have a tendency to think of, well, this is kind of a dumb little prayer request. No, it's not. It's all important to God. It all matters to God. It's all equal. It's all equal. There aren't different levels of God's moving. One's praying for a new job, another's praying to get over a cold. One person needs $10 to meet a need, another person needs 7 figures to meet a need. It doesn't matter. It's the same God. And it's all equal. Can I tell you something? If God can't give me $2.5 million, he can't give me 10. Once again, there aren't different levels of God's moving. God's moving, and God's moving. That's it. James 1:17. Every good gift and every perfect gift, doesn't matter how big or little it seems, every good gift, every perfect gift is from above, and cometh down from the Father of lights, with whom is no variableness, neither shadow of turning. So, John, when you need $250 to pay the light bill, God's able. But Luke, when you need $5,000 to get out of a mess, same God's able. Same God wants to answer both of those needs, and it's no more difficult one way or the other. As y'all go into adulthood, as y'all start your own lives independent of your parents, I just want you to know something. There's no request too small and there's no request too big. God's in control of all of it. I have a bad habit. I'm going to confess something to y'all. Sometimes my habit is to try and figure everything out, and then when I can't figure anything out, I start really praying about it. That's dumb. If I'd just learned to just pray about things, you know what? I may not have to figure stuff out. Because God's already got it figured out. Every bit of it. I had a conversation today with a very knowledgeable man about the Family Life Center. And I've got to tell you, our conversation did not lead me into new understandings of how this is going to be done. In fact, if anything, it gave me more questions. But I keep circling back to the same truth. If this is God's will, and I believe it is, God knows how he's going to pay for it, and God knows how he's going to overcome anything that I see as an obstacle. It is nothing to him. Because he is all-powerful, and he is sovereign, and he's omniscient. He's got all the omnis going for him. You know? Do yourselves a favor, okay? Learn to trust God. Just trust him. Just learn to trust him with everything. It'll make your adulthood so much better. And those of us that are already there, be reminded to trust God. It'll make the rest of whatever adulthood we have better. And as we slip back into a new childhood, which we all are going to do at some point, learn to trust God. His power is equal. Second thing we see here. Well, I sure am grateful for this one. His pity is mighty expansive. Aren't you glad that our God is compassionate and that his compassion knows no limit? Verse number 1. In those days, the multitude being very great and having nothing to eat, Jesus called his disciples unto him and saith unto them, I have compassion on the multitude. By the way, forgive me, every time I watch, we've got a family situation going on. It's a good family situation, but every time my watch shakes, I wonder. It's gone twice since I've been 3 times now. Apparently nobody in my family is in church right now. They're all responding, or they're texting in church. My brother-in-law, they're expecting their baby, and could be any moment. I promise you, my wife's got her phone in master gloves. But anyway, anyway, his pity is expansive. He says, I have compassion on the multitude. Now, I'm not going to get into all the tensing and all that kind of thing, but you understand when he says this, it's a decision. It's not this overwhelming, irresistible, oh, I can't help it. No, he has decided, I'm going to have compassion on these people. You see, compassion, just like real love, agape love, is a decision. It's not a feeling that you can't fight off. It's a decision. And so he has compassion on the multitude because they've now been with me 3 days and have nothing to eat. And if I send them away fasting to their own houses, they will faint by the way, for divers of them came from far. You'll remember that compassion has been said, be your hurt in my heart. It comes from a great Greek word, splagnidzomai, one of my favorite Greek words, splagnidzomai. I just like saying it. I want you to look at the facets of this kind of supernatural compassion, this pity that is so expansive. First of all, it cares not about culture. It does not care about culture. You see, if you do a little digging, you find out that the crowd that was of the 5,000, almost exclusively Jewish. But this crowd, a great deal of them, maybe even a majority of them, because it's in the Decapolis region, are Gentiles. And Jesus doesn't care. His compassion is not limited by their nationality or their ethnicity or their background or anything like that. He has compassion on them. Peter came to this conclusion in Acts chapter what? Bible quiz team? 10, verse 34. And Peter opened his mouth and said, of a truth, I perceive that God is no respecter of persons. But in every nation, he that feareth him and worketh righteousness is accepted with him. The Jews were never meant to be exclusive recipients of the gospel. They were meant to be the vehicle by which the rest of the world got the gospel. Jesus always came to save everyone, not just the Jews and not just the elect. He came for everyone. Now, he cared not about culture. If Jesus gives no regard to ethnicity, we shouldn't either, right? If Jesus will save anyone, as Lester Roloff used to say, to the uttermost or the guttermost, we shouldn't hold back either, should we? No. You see, this pity, this compassion, it didn't care about culture. But you know what else? It also contemplated their conduct. It contemplated their conduct. Jesus was aware of how long they'd been with him. According to verse 2, they'd been with him for 3 days. 3 days. Now, the crowd of 5,000 men, they'd only been with him 1 day. These people have been with him 3 days. He's aware of what we've been through. One of the great lies that the devil likes to tell us, young people, especially when we're going through a tough time, is God either doesn't know, or if he knows, he doesn't care. And that is a lie. He knows, and he cares. He knows, and he cares. Remember what Paul told us in Hebrews? Yes, it was Paul. We have not a high priest which cannot be touched with the feeling of our infirmities. He's aware of your difficulties. Can I tell you what else he knows? He knows your works. Something very interesting. In Revelations 2 and 3, Revelation 2 and 3, you have the 7 churches. There's 3 things going on there. First of all, there's 7 churches that existed in John's day that letter was addressed to. Second of all, there were 7 types of churches that have existed all throughout church history. And thirdly, there were 7 divisions of church history. I think all 3 of those things are true and going on in that same time. Now, here's what's interesting to me. I'm going to give you the references. You can look them up later. All right? Revelation 2:2, 2:9, 2:13, 2:19, 3:1, 3:8, and 3:15. To the church at Ephesus, you know what he says? I know thy works. To the church at Smyrna, you know what he says? I know thy works. To the church at Pergamos, you know what he says? I know thy works. To the church at Thyatira, interesting, he says it twice. I know thy works. To the church at Sardis, I know thy works. To the church at Philadelphia, I know thy works. To the church at Laodicea, I know thy works. Now, there's 2 ways to take that. And I think it depended on the church as to which way it should be taken. For instance, when he said it to Philadelphia, he meant something quite different than when he said it to Sardis. But there's 2 ways to look at it. First of all, if you're not living right, he knows your works. One of the most comforting and one of the most frightening scriptures in all the world is thou hast searched me and known me. But can I tell you, it's also very comforting. Pastor, you don't understand. I've been trying. I've been trying to do right. I've been trying to tell my friends about Jesus. I've been trying to witness to my family. I've been trying to live right in front of my coworkers, and I feel like it's not doing it. Can I tell you something? He said it 7, 8 times. I know your works. I know. These people that had followed him for 3 days, he was not ambivalent to that. He knew it. And sometimes if we're not careful, we can get this idea that we've been trying to serve God. We've been trying to be faithful. We've been trying to do right. And he doesn't even notice. I got news for you. No matter where you find yourself, as an Ephesus kind of Christian, or as a Pergamos kind of Christian, or as a Sardis kind of Christian, or as a Laodicean kind, it doesn't matter. He knows your works. He's watching. He's aware. He is intimately involved with everything that's going on in your life. He knows. These people have been following him for 3 days, and he was not unaware. He was not indifferent to that. This coat is driving me crazy. He was aware. He contemplates their conduct. His compassion cares not about their culture. But you know what? He's also concerned with their condition. We're back in verse 3. If I send them away, fasting to their own houses, they will faint by the way, for divers of them came from far. He's aware of what could happen to them, and he cared about it. He was aware of every possibility on their path, just like he's aware of every possibility on your path. He knows what condition you're in or where you could find yourself, and he cares. Remember what he said in Luke chapter 12, are not 5 sparrows sold for 2 farthings? Not one of them is forgotten before God, but even the very hairs of your head are all numbered. Fear not, therefore. You are more value than many sparrows. I had one of those moments last week. I got my hair cut. And when I get my hair cut with this particular person, she always asks that I slouch down in the chair because I'm a little bit taller than average and she's a good bit shorter than average. And so I start out like this, and by the end of it, I'm like this. Now, here's the problem. Sitting like this, she's got a mirror on the other side of the room that's slanted. And it hits the top of my head just right. And it hit me this past week like it never has before. I said, Tasha, I need you to be honest with me. I'm getting thin up there, aren't I? Well, a little maybe, which is her way of saying, yep. I've accepted that it's going to turn gray. I'd hoped it wouldn't turn loose. But you want to know the truth? I don't know where it's gone. But God knows. I serve a God that when I get my hair cut, He knows exactly how many hairs fall to that floor. He knows. And if He takes the time to know how many of my hairs fall to the floor, be it intentionally or unintentionally, He must care about me. Can I tell you something? I don't think it's unscriptural to take it further. Every time a cell in your body dies, He knows it. Every time a cell regenerates, He knows it. He's that involved in the details. They're having a good time back there. He's concerned with their condition. So His pity, His compassion, it doesn't care about culture. It contemplates our conduct, and it's concerned with our condition. Man, what pity, what compassion is that? And so going back to that first one, His power is equal. You can trust Him, and you can trust Him because you serve a compassionate God, and He's in control. Number 3, something else that we see from this story. Glad of this one too. His patience is enormous. Whew. I don't share that virtue. I'm not overly patient. I was told from a young age, don't ever pray to ask God to give you patience because he'll bring things into your life to teach. I've never asked God to teach me patience, and yet I still face things that require it. I'm not very patient. Well, I sure am glad He is. There's a famous video clip of R.C. Sproul, if you're familiar with him, a Reformed theologian. I would disagree with him on a number of things, but I agree with him on some others. And they were having a Q&A session. And they asked him, he's in heaven now, they asked him what he thought about a given situation, and this was his answer. What's the matter with you people? That was his answer. What's the matter with you people? And now that's on like coffee mugs and T-shirts and everything. Everybody who's an R.C. Sproul fan has that picture of him with making that face. What's the matter with you people? Can I be honest with you? That if I were Jesus, that's exactly what I would have said with what we're about to read. Look at verse number 4. And His disciples answered Him, from whence can a man satisfy these men with bread here in the wilderness? If I were Jesus, I'd have looked at him and said, what's the matter with you people? Do you not remember a couple months ago? 5,000 men, 20,000 people, 5 loaves, 2 fishes. Everybody remember that? What's wrong with y'all? But we don't see that, do we? Maybe He thought it, but He didn't say it. He's so patient. How quickly these disciples forgot what He's done in the past. I mean, what a bunch of Nimrods that they could so quickly forget all that He's already done. Oh, wait a minute. How quickly can I forget? And you forget. all that he's done up to now. I've never seen him or heard him do it, but I got to think there's been times in heaven that God has looked down at me and said, well, he wouldn't say what's the matter with you because he knows what's the matter with me, but something akin to it. Aren't you glad he's patient with us? In fact, David must have had a problem with this too, because he said, bless the Lord, O my soul, and forget not all his benefits. David, don't you forget them. Hey, Christian, bless the Lord, O your soul. Don't you forget his benefits. The devil relies on us having spiritual amnesia, doesn't he? I know I come back to it a lot, and I don't mean to make it my hobby horse. I suppose it's going to be. Do you know how I know he'll build that over there? Because he built this here. And remember, it's no harder for him to build that than it was for him to build this. How do I know that I can get over this disease? Because you don't get over a cold except God gets you over it. How do I know this need, this financial need is going to be met? Because he's met all these others. But when we forget, I sure am glad he's patient. His power is equal. His pity is expansive. His patience is enormous. Then number 4, he is purposeful as an employer. Have you ever worked for somebody? I doubt it, but maybe you have. Because if they're too much like this, they weren't your employer very long. But maybe you've worked for somebody, what should I do? I don't care, just do whatever you want. Just whatever. Just so you show up, I guess, is all I really care about. If that's your employer, then your business is not going to go very well very long. What you want is you want somebody that's got an idea of what's going on and how we get there, and sets goals and sets assignments, and this is what I want you to do, and this is how we're going to do it, and let's move forward, and it's going to be great. You know, that's what you want. You want a purposeful employer. There's never been more of a purposeful employer in the world than was Jesus Christ. I want you to notice a question in verse number 4. His disciples answered him, from whence can a man satisfy these men? That question is its own sermon. From whence can a man satisfy men? Here's the answer. You can't. For 6,000 years, men have tried to find satisfaction in men's ways. They've tried to find satisfaction and fulfillment in what the world has to offer, and it's never happened, not once. The only one who can satisfy the needs of mankind is Jehovah Jireh, Jesus Christ. He's the only one that can do it. When you look at these people on the news and these folks that are in these marches and protesting and they want abortion on demand all the way up to birth and they want you know, the whole thing about the don't say gay bill in Florida. Oh. All it is that kids up to 3rd grade shouldn't have to hear about human sexuality. I agree with that. I'd raise it higher than 3rd grade, but I agree with that. And people are actually taken to the streets protesting such a thing. But you know what? When you watch these people on the news or in person or whatever, let me tell you what you see. You see a group of people that are absolutely miserable. And I'll tell you why they're miserable. They're miserable because they're trying to find their meaning and fulfillment and satisfaction in everything but the one place they can get it. And they have been left unfulfilled at every turn, and they're growing more bitter, and they're growing more hateful, and they're growing more frustrated by the day. Because they have no purpose. From whence can a man satisfy these men? You can't. It has to be an act of God. So here's what you got. What did this crowd need? What did this multitude need? They needed bread, right? These apostles, these disciples, could not produce the bread. But I'll tell you what they could do. They could distribute it. I'll tell you something, friends. We're not capable of producing anything this world needs. But we can distribute what this world needs. See, Jesus knew that the only one who could address this need with these 4,000 people was him. But notice he didn't do this. He didn't say, all right, fellas, step back, sit down. Here we go. No. I'm going to take care of this, but you have a job to do. I'm going to produce what's needed, but you're going to distribute it. I am going to give you a purpose. See, it's not just you get saved and immediately go to heaven. No, you get saved and God gives you purpose. They could not produce the bread, but they could distribute it. Jesus gave them a job, and here's what he insisted on. He insisted that they do what they could. John's in my economics class. I do not insist that John gets straight A's. What? As a teacher? Nope. Here's all I insist. Do what you can. Now, if that's A's, great. If it's C's, if that's what you can do, if that's your best, so be it. But do what you can. Kristen, playing for the girls' basketball team, your job was not to get 100 points a game. That would have been nice. But your job, just like everybody else on that team, was this. Do what you can. If that means setting a screen, set a screen. If that means getting an assist, get an assist. If that means hitting the three, hit the three. If that means breaking the press, break the press. Do what you can. You remember the woman that came and broke open her alabaster box of ointment? Judas was the one that started this thing, and then next thing you know, all the disciples are complaining. What's she doing? Don't you know you could have sold that and given it to the poor? And what did Jesus say? Let her alone. She's done what? Well, she could. She's done what she could. Hey, disciples, I'm going to do what has to be done here, but you're going to do what you can. And there's too many of us Christians that we're just sitting there, just laying back in the lap of luxury, well, God's the only one. I know God's the only one that can do what we need, but he expects us to do what we can. Now, there's a lesser principle here that I want to put out there, and I especially want our young people to get this, but I think we all need it. Here's the principle. You've heard me use it in class. You've heard it in other messages, but I'm going to keep hammering this thing. Here it is. Do what you can, so others have the freedom to do what you cannot. Do what you can, so others have the freedom to do what you cannot. Now, what I'm going to get into for just a couple minutes, I want to make this clear. On the one hand, I wish more people could hear this. on this Wednesday night. But on the other hand, I think probably Wednesday night's the right time to get this out there. There is a principle in ministry that we got to understand if we're going to make this thing for the long haul. Everybody has to do what they can to free up those who need to do what we can't. For instance, Brother Davies teaches throughout the entire school day. We are endeavoring to find the right people in the right places to get him out of some of those classes. Why? Because he's a great teacher. But there's other people that can teach. But God's only brought us one administrator. Now, when you say something like that, well, you think you're too good? No, it's not that at all. You think you're above that? Certainly not. But if God's called him to be the administrator and the associate pastor of this church, and all he does is teach, which is something other people can do and do effectively, then does it not make sense to put people doing what they can so that others can do what they can't? Because there's a lot of people that can teach and do it effectively, but God's only called one administrator. You see what I'm saying? Y'all understand where I'm going with this? But if we're not willing to do what we can, then what happens is other people are not free to do what they've been called to do. Instead, they're doing what others can do. Oh, I feel like I'm in a hole here. Because when pastors talk like this, the first thing that kicks into people's heads is, well, he's trying to get out of work. No, I'm not. I'm not. Let's take cleaning. In 16 years of pastoring, I have pushed many vacuum cleaners. I have cleaned many toilets. I am not above any of that. And if I see it needs to be done, there have been times just in the recent past that, we had some kind of a something in here and I just saw some mess on the floor, grabbed a vacuum cleaner. I'm not above that. And I hope you don't think that that is at all how I see myself. I do not have this clergy laity distinction, which I am the man of God. And I do not stoop to such things. It is not that at all. But why do we have people come in and clean? Because it frees those of us that have other things to do those things. You say, but wait a minute. Are you saying what you do is more important? No, I'm not. I think we've used this analogy before. If you go and have surgery, the surgeon is only one part of what you're looking at. All right, John's going to have something taken out. Let's take out your gallbladder, okay? All you need is a good surgeon to take that gallbladder out, right? Wrong. You need an anesthesiologist. You do not want to be awake for this, okay? But you don't just need an anesthesiologist. You hope that somebody came in and sterilized that room, don't you? You don't want to be in a dirty room, right? You want to be in a clean room, so you hope somebody did that, and you hope somebody sterilized the instruments, and you hope there's some nurses in there, and you hope there's some people watching your vital signs, and we just go down the list of all the people that are involved in one gallbladder surgery. It's not just the surgeon. And any one of those people fails at their job, you got bad news. Any one of them. So back to me and Brother Davies and whoever else. It's not that we're more important. But if there's any job that's not getting done, what happens? It ultimately affects everything, doesn't it? Right? So, well, you're the one on staff. You're right, I am. He's on staff full time. You're right, he is. And by the way, nobody's complained. I'm not at all. That's why I said this is probably good for a Wednesday night crowd. But I'm trying to get a principle across. If there's something that God gives me in my life to do, that's nothing. Okay? Here's your job, Luke. I want you to go around after every service and make sure all the doors are locked. That's all? That's not very important. Well, it is when that burglar comes pulling on the doors. right? It is important. What did Jesus say? You're faithful over a few things, I'll make you faithful over many. I'm saying if God gives you something to do, especially young people, but for all of us, if God gives you something to do, you be faithful in what he's given you to do, because what he's doing is he's using you to do something to free up others to do something you can't. And one day, you'll be able to do what you couldn't do. Is this making sense at all? I hope it is. Here's my whole point from this thing. Here's the so what. We see later on the disciples, man, God used them to heal people. Even a few people came back from the dead under their ministry. Peter preached the gospel and thousands of people got saved. We see, but where did it start? Here's where it started. Take us bread and give it to those people. And if you'll learn to do what you can do, what God gives you to do, by and by, you know what you'll find him giving you to do later? Much more pronounced things. But you got to be faithful in what he gives you to do now. Does that kind of sum it up pretty good? I never broached the subject that I feel like I covered it right. And yet I'll probably try again at some point. That's the principle. So we look at this story, this other multitude that's fed, and we see that his power is equal. His pity is expansive, his patience is enormous, and he's purposeful as an employer.